Good morning and welcome to our time of prayer and reflection for today. Excuse me just a sec. Oh dear. I wonder how you reacted when you heard me cough like that. Now, obviously, you're only seeing me through a screen, but if you had been in the same room with me and had heard me cough that way, how would you react? Here's something that I've experienced over the last few years. I am a lifelong asthmatic. I've got really, really damaged lungs. And so for me, coughing like that all the time is normal. I'm not contagious. I'm not going to give anything to anybody else. But what I've seen in the past few years since COVID happened is that when I cough like that, people automatically draw away from me in fear because they think immediately she must have COVID and she's going to give me COVID. And so they get worried. Now, I'd like you to hold that image in your mind as we read today's gospel reading, because we're thinking about something that affected a lot of people and society in ways that are very, very difficult, just the same way that COVID has. So, our gospel reading for today is taken from Luke chapter 17, verses 11 to 19. And it says this: Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and called in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw he was healed, came back praising God in a loud voice. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Okay, you would be forgiven if you had no idea what leprosy is and had never seen it. I hope, actually, that you haven't. It's really not very common anymore, certainly not in the UK. But leprosy was a type of skin disease. It was a horrible condition, an infection that basically ate away at people's skin. So people would end up with horrible open sores all over themselves. In extreme cases, they would even lose hands and feet and limbs. They would fall off. It was that bad. So because leprosy was so bad, and it was also contagious, people were frightened of it. So if somebody got leprosy, they were automatically expected to leave their town, their community, and to go live somewhere called a leper colony, as in they had to go live with other people who had leprosy. But they had to leave their homes, their families, their friends, everything they'd ever known. So they were isolated. They were cut off from society. Physically, they were suffering from the disease, but socially, they were also suffering because they'd been cut off. So the people that we meet in this particular story are in isolation, they're in lockdown, they're contagious, and they can't come near anyone else. That's why I use the example of COVID-19, because we don't see much of leprosy anymore, but we certainly know what it's like to be isolated or in lockdown courtesy of COVID. There was a fear at the time that these people would make others sick. And so they were cut off, they were ostracized. Now, when the lockdowns first started happening for us with COVID, perhaps it was a bit of a novelty at first. Yay, we can all stay home. But then eventually it got boring. And then eventually it really started to affect our mental health because we couldn't have contact with other people in case we made them sick. Now, imagine what it would have been like for these men who were basically in isolation and lockdown for the rest of their lives until they died. And imagine what the impact would have been for them on their mental health while they were also suffering physically, that if anybody even saw them, they would automatically draw away from them in fear. Now, we've learned an awful lot through these last few years of how to keep ourselves safe. And of course, it's really, really important when we're sick to isolate. It's important to sanitize and wash our hands and to wear masks when it's appropriate. We know that. But it's also appropriate to consider how we treat other people, because we can't spend the rest of our lives drawing away from anyone who looks sick, because we do need to consider, well, what's the impact on them? Okay, maybe they have COVID and maybe they really should be at home. But what if there's someone like me who has a disability, who lives like this for the rest of our lives? What's the impact on their mental health if we make judgments and assumptions about them? So I'd like to encourage you as you're going about your business. I'm not suggesting that you should be unsafe or unwary. It's important to keep ourselves safe. But it's also important to check ourselves sometimes and to think about the judgments that we make about other people, the assumptions we make, and how that changes our behavior and how in turn that affects the person that we are judging. Perhaps that's something that you could think about today, and we'll return to this story tomorrow as we unpack a little bit more about it. But for now, as we finish, I'd love to pray for you. Gracious God, I pray for all of us that on the one hand, you would help us to keep safe and well as we still deal with the implications of the COVID-19 pandemic. I pray that you would help us to learn how not only to be safe, but how also to be part of a community, the human community, and to still make connections with one another. I pray that you would help us that when we are tempted to make judgments or assumptions about other people, that we would stop and think about the impact that has on those people, as well as the impact it might have on us. Help us whenever it is possible to extend the same grace and mercy to other people that you did. In your holy name I pray. Amen. I will see you all tomorrow, and we'll pick this up again.